So, Shruti, you want to go ahead and introduce Scribe Craft?
So me and Akshata will be moderating and anchoring this event. So I would like to introduce you the Scribe Craft and also the objective of this panel discussion. So hello everyone, my name is Shruti. Scribe Craft is a platform that aims to provide both children and adults with unique opportunities to explore the world of creative arts and develop their own skill sets. In this meeting, we seek to gather qualitative knowledge from our experts to gain deeper understanding about the creative spaces. Our objective is to engage in a comprehensive discussion that delves deep into the challenges faced, strategies involved, and the potential solutions to further enhance the creative experience provided by Scribecraft. We are very excited to hear from you, your thoughts and experiences. Over to you, Akshita.
Yes, thank you, Shruti. We are looking forward. We are super excited to gain insights and learn a lot from you all. Before we dig deeper into the discussion, I would like to introduce you all briefly. So we have Astha. Astha is a creative writer, a filmmaker, an educator, and also a mental health expert. Gaurav Juyal is an animator. He is also an educator and an experienced designer. Afreen is a political economy specialist, consultant, researcher, and also an educator. Sinthuja is a course consultant, and she is experienced in designing courses and curriculum. Thank you for joining us. I would like you all to take turns and briefly introduce yourself. Gaurav, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, you gave a brief introduction. That's perfect, but I'm pursuing learning experience design and I'm coming from a animation background. So it has been a journey there. And my larger purpose, what I'm pursuing is how can we make education and learning fun, simple, effective, and also possibly student driven. So these are the questions that I'm pursuing. And I am working in and out of both creative field, arts, design, and education.
That's great. Astha, do you want to go next?
Sure, why not? Okay, so I'll do it a little differently. You've already introduced me. Am I audible? Sorry, a little late to check that. Okay. Why am I interested in this conversation or this platform? Because like you said, that I'm an educator, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a storyteller, I'm a healer. But all my films have been around kids, have been around children. I have been teaching in university, but once I had a brilliant opportunity and something I shared with Gaurav as well, that I had a brilliant opportunity to teach in a school called Riverside, which is a little alternative teaching space. So it kind of blasted my mind at how creative these kids can be, how open, how moldable they are. So I'm an educator, I'm a healer, I'm a learner myself. And I have been a child who has been not interested in conventional or not adapted to conventional teaching methods. So constantly trying to do something to make teaching a little more interactive platform. And by profession, by training, I'm a filmmaker. That's about it.
We are so grateful to have you along. Afreen, would you like to go next? Afreen, can you please?
Yeah. I'll just say what interests me about this discourse is, since my college days, I have been volunteering my time and teaching students. But I have usually taught students from marginalized backgrounds, people living in the slums in my city, refugees, people affected by conflict. And that's what interests me, is that I try to look at how knowledge is disseminated outside the walls of traditional sites such as schools, universities, which are very privileged sites. So, and also as a researcher working with pastoral communities, I look at the futures of children who live outside mainstream hegemonic production sites, like who aren't part of the middle class, who aren't part of the discourse that we usually have. They have their own systems of sharing knowledge, of learning. So essentially I try to analyze how knowledge is created and produced, which is called episteme. So this is what brings me over here, and I think it's important to have conversations on the impact of the tools that we use on how knowledge is created, right? We make assumptions about the content of the what is written in the book as holy, as honest, but also looking at look from 2015 onwards. In fact, from where I live in Jammu and Kashmir, there have been lockdowns even before COVID happened. Right up 2018, 19, 20, 21. And during that time, we saw great change in the tools that we employed to educate our children, right? And it was a very differing result in different regions of the country, and also different social groups. So that is what interests me. It seems that we'll have a conversation also about the tools, and I would like to bring in perspectives which are more diverse.
Thank you. Sindhuja, would you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a teacher by profession. I have taught from grades anywhere between LKG to grade 5. So that's the age group that I work with. So I came into art a bit late, but as personally, actually I picked it up only during COVID when, you know, there was a lot of time and there was also not a lot of judgment of my pieces. So, and it was an incredible journey to see the kids explore it and also explore the curriculum where it's part of it. So, yeah, that's a bit of what I do and what I will be doing in future.
That's great. So now that we are also talking about, as you said, that you began your journey in COVID, began your art journey in COVID. So we would like to first address the question, like, what exactly do you mean by creative arts? What does creative arts mean to you? And what would you consider creative arts? Gaurav?
Matlab, I'm not going by any definition defined by, because I could be wrong there. But it for me, it goes generally, people are, when we say arts, automatically most people are thinking visual. But I think it's beyond. So art is a pure expressive field. So as long as you're expressing and, and then employing creative ways of doing it, I think it will fall. So it could go into motion and dance and music and everything as well. It just becomes a medium of your choice, basically, eventually, right? Because if you think about intelligence, how can intelligence be constrained to this is the only way that it has to think? Then you're not really pushing the boundaries of intelligence. If you give a problem and let the mind and the body think about it and let it come with an answer and with a communication also. So which means I can think about a solution, but I can also express it in 10 different ways. So then I have a whole palette of ways in which I can think and also ways in which I can express. And then it starts going into the creative ways and creative arts, basically. Then it offers you that whole palette of how many, not limited to, but yes, it offers you a great palette of, there are so many different ways in which you can also answer the question, not just, think about it. So I think we will also get into the discussion of why it is important. But I have just highlighted that we'll be constraining ourselves if we still think that IQ defines intelligence. And which is, if you go even by I do agree with Howard Gardner about his multiple intelligence system, because there is so much more to a human being than just memory and analysis and logic. So this is where I would say creative art becomes essentially important to assist and develop intelligence further.
Okay. Does anybody want to add something to it?
Not really, but Gaurav is right when he says when we say art, we have a very narrow view of what it is, and that's also a very public perception of, not public. I mean, most people have a very narrow idea of what arts can be. So it's painting, drawing, and if they so feel, they will include dance and writing. But yeah, I think there's so much more beyond that in there. That's actually an expression. I mean, rightfully, what is creative? It's thinking. So they are both processes, like he pointed out.
Right. Now that we're talking about creative art, especially in schools, do you think, like, as all
I
of you here
I
are
want to add something. Sorry,
Okay.
I want to add something. And I mean, I think some of you do know that I'm a part of the critical communication and critical thinking group in JKLU. And I must say that, and this is something I think which Gaurav also like touched upon briefly, is that there can be no criticality without being creative, right? Because in traditional form of school teaching, especially in India, we are taught how to arrive at a solution, right? And that begs the question, is that solution for whom? So if there's a problem and there's a solution and you're taught to come to that solution, then there's a definite intent behind at arriving, taking that particular journey, right? If you're saying that there is inflation happening, and this is the only way through which you can mitigate that, most of those solutions might only benefit certain people. Creativity allows you to look at the solution differently and also consider whom the solution impacts. And also the fact that I think that within our fundamental rights, the right to equality and the right to freedom of speech are, they're basically part of the fundamental rights, which is a basic structure doctrine. You can't change that. And that imperatively links to creativity. So if you're creative, the more creative a society is, the more open they are to differing ideas, differing values, and they're more progressive. So we'll see less creative society, less critically thinking society as being homophobic. There'll be a lot of gendered violence, right? So I think creativity is not just about developing an individual. I don't see this as an individualistic tendency, but it also builds in communitarian tendencies to work as a social group, because a lot of these problem solving exercises, and I'm sure Gaurav, Asta, and Sinjuja would know better, are that there are a lot of group exercises. To be creative is very difficult to push on a single person. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about this. Yeah.
Adding to what you said, Afreen, I have a question regarding this. So basically, if there are like a lot of social groups and communities that have been formed through creative expression, there are also chances that these creative expressions are also exploited in a way, and people can use it in multiple different forms. So maintaining that solidarity in classrooms, how do you manage to do that?
I would want to say first that exploitation of creative tendencies. This we have seen historically, wherein a lot of what is indigenous knowledge is technically very creative, right? You'll see tribes engaging with limited resources in very creative ways. How to preserve the forest while extracting work from them, how to share their knowledge systems, not through just pen and paper, but through song, through art design, what we now call art design, which is suddenly, taken away from them. right? Colonization has taken away a lot of art from these communities, a lot of creative knowledges and preserves of knowledge from these communities. So historically, we have been creative. I'm just trying to reassert that what we are proposing here is not anything new. We have just forgotten along the way, or we were made to forget along the way. Colonization has taken away a lot of tendencies to take long winding routes for certain profit. So that is one aspect which I wanted to comment on. The second aspect is that schisms within classrooms that you're talking about, right? This we of course see a lot in the classroom, and especially to basically hit the hammer right where it is. We are living in fascist times. There are divisive politics all around. And unfortunately, these are being pushed into schools. We see rewriting of history books. We see movies coming out as documentaries, which are nothing but propaganda against minorities. And these are being fed to children at a very young age. However, the best way to deal with them is and this is something which I find very problematic about online classes, is that it keeps people away from each other. And the best way to break a stereotype is just make people sit together and perform their everyday lives, right? It doesn't have to be big, glorious actions. Just the task of eating food together, just the task of sitting together, wearing whatever clothes you see, because there are like uh, these kind of hate seeps into everyday, very nuanced things. It's like the way we dress, the way we eat, the way we speak. That's where stereotypes builds on. Nothing too fancy, just these simple things. And the moment you just bring people together and you just say, oh, I heard this kind of rumor about these kind of about a particular community, and I don't see that happening. They're the same as us. And over here, creative exercises, projects, group projects, they tend to bring people together faster, and also they tend to sort of they create an artificial friction which children have a very good tendency to resolve very easily, much better than adults. They can find solutions to meaningless problems way faster. They realize that all these notions of hate and all these notions, big fancy concepts, they don't mean too much once you start playing together, learning together, eating together, right? And probably their intent to go to that break period faster by doing a project, that is more of their everyday concerns than big larger concepts which states bring out to be. So yes, I think creativity does help bridge these gaps between communities.
Asta and Gaurav, I would like to address the question similarly to you. Basically, since you both are directly from the creative fields, while designing curriculums and courses for students, what's the process, especially, and what are the challenges that you face when it comes to everybody's individual expression?
Wanna go first, Gaurav?
I was about to say the same thing to you, but I can go first. So your question is, how do we design the process for students? Anything I'm missing in the question?
Yeah, so including the creative exploitation that Afin just addressed.
Okay. And do you also want to, when you say creative exploitation, do you also mean when creative forms of expression becomes controversial? Is it
Yes.
in a way? See, the thing is, it is a complex. I'll come to the classroom later. It's simpler there, but on a nation scale, it becomes complex. Because one thing is, yes, art. If I have to talk about art and science as two sides of, like they often compare the two and versus, and so one is actually talking about expression, which is arts, and one is the explanation of nature, which is science. And therefore, when we talk about expression and freedom of speech and freedom of expression, so then ideally, then the moment you start drawing a line, okay, but you can do everything but this, then it is not a freedom, right? So it's complex. That's why I'm saying and then we also have a clause that people can get offended, and then the moment people get offended, and then it also becomes political, and they use this very often, that they hunt actually creative expression, and where can they get offended, because then it can be turned into a political tool of propaganda as well, right? So how can you express if you have so many different kind of layers of filters and you have to think too much, and then one person does something, then it offends the person of another faith. It's a very complex scenario, right? At the same time, some people can definitely do things to offend people also. I'm just saying, you have enough people who you can take example of. Even in a classroom setting, there are people out of whatever joy, they can do that as well. So then how do you move around this complex scenario? So one thing was that art was also, there is also like a private circle there in a certain way, that people have a gallery, they call people who can understand and who can, who are the right people to understand. But the problem is now, like I said, ki, if politics is hunting for these grounds, when somebody is trying to do an exhibition and suddenly you get this political party with all these youth section coming in, creating a ruckus. So now that is something I would say ki the solution could have been that everything doesn't have to be in the public eye, because not everybody cannot understand every field and every domain. Okay. And people also cannot understand it. Art is complex, and therefore we can't expect everyone to understand the subtlety, the meaning of the expression. What did you intend versus what you see? Now somebody needs an essay or really to explain every piece of art to really come to, but that's not possible. So therefore I think in that scenario, again, I don't have a solution to it, but I'm saying these are the complexity of the field of expression. And when you give the and half of, or not half, I think most of it is created problem. It does not exist, like I said, because it becomes political in nature very often. In a classroom, these are actually great. I said classroom is less complex because even when a student does something, I give them all the freedom to, I say, okay, you have, the medium is not a problem. This is the objective. Now you can do whatever you want. And let's say somebody does something and this conversation comes up in the class that some people are actually getting, because they're also influenced by the outside circle, right? By the parents, by society, by the culture and everything. So in a classroom setting, it's much easier for us to make 30 people sit down and have a conversation around it. Okay. And we don't have to come to a conclusion, but we have to just listen to each other and understand. And it's a slow process. Maybe in one day, it's not going to resolve anything, but when you keep discussing, and like what Afreen was also saying, sit down, talk about it, share experiences, and that's when this multitude of perspective starts seeping into people's. And that I think is very, very important, that the world is full of grays and colors, and it is definitely not black and white. And therefore, and this is where empathy for designers comes from, right? So it does not matter whether I like something or not, but can I actually empathize with the people who actually like it or not? It doesn't matter. It does not matter if it is my choice or if I. So we actually force ourselves to sometimes empathize, which is it's a conscious practice, because naturally it's not going to come, because that's not part of your experience from life. So we put ourselves, we think about it, we ask them 10,000 questions, and then it might take us a week to really understand what that person was saying or going through. So I think I hope I've covered some points. It's an open-ended, again, there's no conclusion here, but I was just trying to cover a few points that you mentioned. Yeah. Yeah.
Would you like
Prastha.
to add something?
Can you ask the question again? Kind of teleported to some other conversation.
Yes, so I asked regarding what's inside classroom, what exactly does creative exploitation, sorry, what are the, okay, I'm sorry,
What are
what
the challenges you faced when you design a curriculum for children, and also keep in mind that all of the children, so it is a inclusive course, that all of children's creative expression come through the course.
Got it. Got it. I find a bigger problem here than the children themselves. The bigger problem here I have faced is the problem of the system. The system that we are in, unfortunately, conditions us into the reward and punishment way. So the challenge that one faces is that whatever you design, whatever inclusive form of curriculum or inclusive form of, especially in a subject like this, which is very expressive, how do you break from that reward and punishment? And because art is one subject, which will never have, you can never say, oh, this is best, oh, this is rubbish, right? The moment you integrate that in the curriculum and the moment that is understood or accepted, or more importantly, enjoyed through the process of teaching that subject, is when the curriculum or the subject or the exercise would be successful, in my opinion. Again, my opinion. Second point being, art inherently is something which is limitless. So the challenge, then again, I bring it back to the system, because the system would by default have a certain time frame, a certain time constraint. So how do you kind of, encompass all that needs to be interacted, or all that needs to be conveyed in that limitation of time? So that's the challenge which I would personally face. However, it's if it can be run parallelly as a mentor, as an educator, if that watch can be maintained while giving that freedom of expressing the way you want, or using any mediums you want, or having an interactive, collaborative uh, exercise. I think it's not that big of a challenge.
Can I
hope I have
add something,
been,
Akshata?
yeah,
Asta, if you're done.
done. Yeah.
Okay. I was saying we also need to develop like a practice of, like, if you give a lot of art around people, people get used to it, right? We get used to everything. So you have to normalize a lot of things. And so once people are they're living around art of every kind, they will automatically develop more patience for, again, multitude of ways of, because I don't think it's every part of the world has its own problems, but the problem that we have with art, in every sense, it does not exist to this degree in many nations, right? So ours is a problem of immense diversity and lack of understanding each other, and it has become worse now. Like, before, it was actually, people had a very seamless, organic way of living around each other. Now, because of the divisions, and again, it's mostly political, it's clearly political in nature. So because naturally, people, if you see, people are designed to heal each other and work together. They're always designed to work together, actually. Unless somebody is provoking and unnecessarily creating, people figure out a way. They have always figured out a way. And this prolonged times of conflict is definitely fueled. So yeah, I think that's just, I just wanted to say that we need just more art around people, and they automatically are going to.
Interesting you said that, and something Afreen also said, but doesn't, and you as an artist would be able to, add on to this point more. Art as a form itself is something which automatically is inclusive. Even if it is a form of expression, the expression is something which is viewed by an audience. That is one thing. Second, when you're creating it in classroom setup or in schools, etc., it is, even when you're designing it as a subject, or you're designing it as a, even if they're doing it individually on their sheets, but it is something which automatically engages everyone. So it automatically ends up being a form which is so interactive. And momentarily, of course, then you go beyond, all these differences and barriers and limitations as such.
I actually have to take forward Gaurav's point on we getting used to art, but just thinking about it, where are the spaces of art around our schools, around our communities, around our neighborhoods? There are not many. I mean, I think one point Gaurav mentioned in terms of galleries and things, but that's a very elite way of looking at art. Then, as a country, we're not that way. Our art form is embedded into a way of life, and it's it a way of acknowledging that we are severely lacking. So I think that's where a lot of change in perspective actually has to happen in terms of creating spaces for art around us. And those could be very indigenous, which we have to identify and appreciate that. I think appreciate the aesthetics in that. So I think that is a small point I think we're very lacking. And in terms of engagement with the community, I think that's very very less on art. Yeah, because it's very exciting for me to say like a nicely painted flyover, but it still serves a purpose. It still surrounds yourself with art, like just Gaurav said. It's just yeah, we kind of have to kind of invest into surrounding ourselves with more art. And I also think we have to slightly go away with how we perceive art in terms of galleries and paintings. So that perception has to break. And for that, we have to have a radically, it wouldn't be radical, but just a different way of communication with everybody. Yeah. Afin, you want to add something? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'll just restructure, frame some points which all of you actually made it at one point or the other. The first point is system. I just want to structure this in terms of the outline presented to us, since this would probably be heard by parents. The system at school level, I'm talking about, so this is in context of the question on designing courses. If we talk till our higher education, till school education, courses are not designed by teachers. They're designed by state departments, education departments, right? We have NCERTs, we have state boards. So traditionally, decentralization was on the agenda on education, wherein state boards would take up a lot of leap, a lot of control in making sure that the content which is taught to the students is diverse and localized, right? I'm sure a lot of you must have heard of this cliche that if we ask children to draw a painting, it'll be inevitably a mountain, some tree, a house, and a river, even if they live on an island somewhere down in the Andaman or somewhere South India where they've never seen a mountain, right? So that is where decentralization becomes important. As parents, so this exercise that we are doing cannot be only done by educators, because we are bound by certain laws and norms, right? School teachers cannot draft courses. It is out of their mandate. So then as parents, you will need to put, and if they're heading like down the line, you will need to put pressure on your local government to change the norms of education boards, allowing more flexibility in the way content is delivered in schools, right? You need to push for more decentralization. You need to be open to more of a localized language and knowledge system than the hegemonic knowledge, wherein everything is sanitized using English, that to British English, which takes away a lot of meanings and creativities for children who probably would be talking. So children learning A for apple when they will never engage in an apple in their real life, where apples will be too expensive for them to consume. This is a reality in a lot of places. So A is that as parents, as teachers, as citizens, we need to rethink the way structures allow schools and universities to function and design courses. And I think Snijuja did a brilliant exposition on access to spaces, and I won't add anything more on them. But yes, we do need to have spaces for children to be free, right? You see in urban areas, there are barely any public parks, public spaces where children can just roam around, draw on the ground, draw on the walls, right? Even in universities, if art is a very important tool of dissent, of counterculture, of critical thinking, right? You see students in universities and schools drawing graffitis which talk about social issues. However, we have public defacement laws which stop people from doing that. So even governments control the way art is created. And finally, I think the third most important thing is of a binary. let's not think of creativity as creativity in classroom versus creativity outside classroom. I think this is the time in learning we are, as a society, we have enough tools to basically demolish the binary between a university or a school and the spaces beyond. We need to think that as a society, every space has the potential to teach, has a potential where people can learn, can express themselves. So if you only, if you create this binary that you can do certain kind of creative and knowledge based learning in schools, it becomes very exclusive, because then anyone who is not part of a formal education, formal teaching, who wants to basically try something new, we refuse to acknowledge them. You need to have a 12th class, you need to have a BA, you need to have a master's, a PhD, or whatnot to be taken seriously. I'm talking about for the majority of people. Of course, there are people privileged enough who have like basically a background in arts or privilege enough ki theek hai, for them these things don't matter. But for everyday people like you and I, we need to build credibility by investing in education, which can be very expensive. So especially with this new education policy and privatization of universities, people cannot afford higher education anymore. So then a way to bridge that is to, as teachers, right, as people in power, positions of power, as people who can give out jobs, we need to be open to the idea that people who don't have formal training can be as critical thinkers and as creative and as productive as people who have learned in a walled off space, maybe away from the realities of the society. I mean, even now within our university, I don't know how many students really know what happens around it, because university by design is a closed off space, while people out in the fields in the villages will know solutions to modern issues of climate change, sustainability, deforestation better than what is taught in the classroom, right? So I think binaries need to be broken, walls need to be torn down, we need to be more open, and that inherently we are making our knowledge system more creative and open, right? Not just the tool but also the system itself.
Getting back to the initial point that was made, that was regarding Asa made about rewards and punishment, and Afreen also spoke about the, usually in schools we have like a specific drawing like mountains and rivers and sun. So basically, there is usually like people try to like develop courses in a way that it can also be graded or marked. So can you all elaborate on then how can we change the evaluating system if the creative, if there is a liberty in creative expression, and how can you develop that? Instead of that.
It's the easiest in my age group. You don't have any grades for art. You send them back home, you say that's nice, you ask them to talk about it. So it's, see, even till you are 16, 17, I don't think it has to be graded. It doesn't have to be graded. It is what you put on paper. It is what you write. It is what you speak. It's what you say. It's out there. Yes, we can have a very critical conversation about it. We can talk about perspectives. We can talk about how another person, feels about it. I think that's what you can do with it. I can't speak to what happens in universities, but I think this is what you can, and there are schools which are doing that. There are schools which are trying to, put art into their curriculums, not as a separate subject, but somehow, use it while they, teaching their science and the social sciences. So I think there's a lot of very standalone, progress happening, which kind of has not consolidated. You don't see it everywhere. You have different schools trying out different things. So in terms of grading, at least with respect to schools, and definitely with respect to, primary, it doesn't have to be graded. It needs to be talked about. I think that's where the skill of the teacher comes in. That's where there is a generational shift, because the teacher wouldn't have, kind of worked with this kind of pedagogy, where there are conversations that needs to be had with parents in terms of, we're not going to assess your child in terms of A, B, C, D, or out of 10. I think that becomes more important. The not having the assessment part is the easy. The having the conversations with the parent, having the conversation with the teacher is where we actually have to work on? So anyone else wants to take it forward?
I just wanted to make an observation. I mean, as you said, like, I think at primary school level, children aren't graded, right? They don't get any marks.
I mean, it depends on schools, but yes,
Yeah, I mean,
most schools are going towards that.
Interestingly, also in a lot of, like, on the other end, also at PhDs, usually a lot of PhDs aren't graded. Either you get a pass or you have to redo the whole thing. So I think that's interesting, right? And I think this is my personal opinion, not like probably what universities would reflect and administrators, but I would like that concept as well, right? So rather than looking at the outcome, and this is something that I try to do in classroom as well, when I'm actually grading sheets, right? Even though I'm forced to write a grade, but I don't look at the solution, right? I would rather look at whether the concepts have been understood, interrogated. The path, the journey for me is as important than the final destination. You might meander a bit, you might reach the wrong spot, but as long as your intent is clear and the tools that you use are right and safe for you and the community, I'm okay with that, right? Solutions change over time, but as long as your core, your fundamentals are clear and how to arrive at a solution which is inclusive, which is diverse, which is acceptable to all, which is not selfish, I'm okay with that form of assessment, like looking at more at the way the journey is taken rather than what at the end you do at the end of the day. Also, the fact remains, like, children are under immense pressure on the day of exams. I do not believe that that one day should, judge their entire year, right? That one day they might be sick, the pen might run out of ink, there might be some thing that happened at the exam center, who knows? Lack of electricity, bad benches, there's so many reasons which we don't consider, right? I remember having writing my 10th and 12th on benches which had like more of holes than the bench itself, right? These are real issues of writing exams in peak summers without a fan running over me and being basically dehydrated. So I think as a system, we need to start to move away from also creating a hierarchy of people using these grades, saying that this person is better than the other because they scored more in one subject. I think we can grow as a society that once we figure out our central values, which we do have, our constitution has those values, our preamble has those values, scientific temperament is there, we have DPSPs, direct principles of state policy, which talk about both the arts, social sciences, and core sciences, right? And as long as our society and our children imbibe those values, and maybe they flounder a bit on arriving at the right solution, I think it's okay, right? Solutions will come. We see that happening. Like the previous Chandrayaan, the rover failed to land on the moon, right? But this one, they did not give up hope. They did not give up their scientific temperament. I mean, that is what we wish our children to imbibe, not to give up, right? To explore new horizons. So what does it matter that the rover failed in the first attempt? By that metric, if we start grading that the way we do our students after 12th, if somebody fails a math exams, they can't even sit for entrances. By that design, the next rover would not have this mission, would have been entirely scrapped because they failed in the first attempt, right? So I think there is a drastic need to reshape the way we look at success and failure. We should focus less on the final result, more on the process, because a lot of people just memorize the solution rather knowing how they arrived at it and whether it's the right solution, while whether it's worthwhile for everyone. So I think, but then of course, teachers, educators can't always do that. This needs to come from citizenry, because at the end, education policies are not shaped by teachers, they are shaped by the demands of the societies which politicians take up and look at. So if you talk to your local legislator, if you show an intent that divisive politics don't matter for you, rather than these values matter for you, the education system will change accordingly.
Oh, okay, Gaurav, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. See, I have honestly strong distaste for modern education, because I find myself like I'm one of the kids who disliked it a lot. And that's one of the reason I work with education, is because I'm working for those kids. See, there will be children who love it also. Okay, who love the exams, who love to ace, who love mugging up. There are personalities of all kind, definitely. But I'm talking about those, and that was the reason I joined education, was key. What about those who were just like me, who suffered, and who I thought I wasted 12 years of my life completely, because I would do a lot. I would learn more at home than I would learn in school. And secondly, it was not suited for me in terms of like in terms of communication, and I wanted my own time. The explanation was not good enough. The time given was not good enough. So there were too many problems. And so in that sense, I would say that, I have a problem with the whole core system itself, because one is the quantity. The quantity of data they're trying to mug you up in 12 years and beyond. I'm not going into colleges, but it's not suited for that age group either. I know a child who was going into, I think, upper KG, or maybe first grade, but that child had not done like one of the kindergartens. The school refused, saying he has not done the curriculum of a kindergarten. I'm like, if you're going to put a curriculum, even if it's not graded, but if you're going to go by curriculum for a child who's like, just like a toddler, then there's something seriously wrong in the way you're looking at education and learning. And the way you are like, because they're like, oh, it's very difficult for our teachers to now, because all the other children know whatever curriculum that is, whether it's 1 to 10 or ABCD. Now the teachers are going to have a problem. Okay, so this standardization and this pipeline factory process that they have created is extremely, it's so strict that you can't even waver around it. And it suits the school now because it's coming from the administration, because they want to run a system. They don't want to give a customized experience to a child, right? And therefore, and the fees is just increasing. Ridiculous amount of fees is being charged. Like, so one more thing with art. See, now NEP ke saath, like art integration and those things are coming in. But my problem is, if you don't reduce the quantity of the previous curriculum, how are you going to fit in a new technique and a creative technique, which takes more time? See, a teacher can come into a classroom, finish a chapter in a day or 1 hour, let's say. But even if I have to take a micro concept, like a word, and I want to express it through a creative arts medium, it will take me 3 hours, right? So how am I going to integrate art integration into the curriculum if there is no time left for, it's like the curriculum, it's so like वही complete करने के लिए time नहीं है, तो आप उसके ऊपर creative arts कैसे उसके through कैसे पढ़ाएंगे? वो impossible है. So if it's up to me, I would reduce the curriculum to 10% and then use the 90% time to actually develop holistically, like give more time to students, have conversations, express more and things like that. Because honestly, I don't see using all that 12 years of knowledge. I don't even remember it, honestly. I don't know how many of you remember each day of your life. If you don't, then I don't think we have really using all that stuff. We use very, very simple things is what human beings use. Even as a designer, even now, I use basic math. I use basic geometry. I use basic communication. I've learned not English, not in school by textbooks, but by speaking, right? So that's how humans speak. They speak, they imitate. So I think then it needs a really go into the whole way we are teaching, which is right now almost impossible for a quick, it's going to come with time. I don't know when it's going to come. But it definitely needs a relook at it.
I know you might want to move on to the next question, but there's some 2, 3 very interesting points which I want to just add on. Afrin, you've noticed something very interesting about the pass and redo or the incomplete, how it is in the junior school and PhD level as well. I wish, I'm no expert, but I wish that is something which can be integrated throughout the education system. But what definitely could be thought upon is that can the creative subjects, whether it is art and painting or any form of creative subjects in school, in academic the 12 years duration, can they be given equal importance as other subjects? The fact that, I mean, even as a student, I didn't like it, that why art was a extra subject or art was a, extra curricular subject. Why wasn't it a main subject? And that is what will give importance to everyone, each kind of personalities, each kind of careers, each kind of, I mean, each student would have favorite subject. Then why wasn't art given as much importance as maths or science? So if that could be, that small subtle change could be brought in, and which would then have an effect on the psychology, on the behavior, on the society as well. One of the reasons, see, I agree a little bit, but I don't completely agree when we were discussing that we don't have enough places in the country where art is showcased. There are enough places, but those places are not given enough importance. They're not given enough exposure. They're not given enough funds. If that can be changed, you know, even my parents, when I was choosing, and I think this is something which each one of us, at least four of us, me, Gaurav, Akshata, Shruti, sitting here, we would have faced in our life, that when you tell your parents that, okay, we are not going to do mainstream science, we are choosing art, so we are choosing design, someone would have told us that that is not a successful career path you're choosing. So if that mentality can be influenced or changed by giving equal importance to arts from the school, from the conditioning that starts at a very young age, that is point number one. Point number two is when it comes to how to influence it. So as I said, I'm not an expert that I can influence the change that, or even propose a solution in this discussion itself, that how do we work around evaluation. What can be influenced is, it all, and like Sandhuja said, it all depends on the teacher, right? So art design is, one, it is about thinking. It can be influenced in thinking. Second, it can be projected and portrayed through doing what you're doing as an output. But in my opinion, most importantly, if that can be induced in being, in how you are functioning, and even in your day-to-day life, that is something which could then it doesn't divide art and science or art. That is something which can be applied on and integrated um into each other. So yeah, that's it.
I have one thing to add in. So, in my experience, when I was younger, the creative arts were like, you can do it in, my parents used to tell me that you can do it in free times, you should do it in free time. But when I grew older, it was seen as a distraction, like painting, even listening to song, like from their perspective, they feel like they are the distraction. And when I went to do the competitive exams, it was completely abandoned in my home. Like, it was therapeutic to me, but when it's completely banned, like, I was very struggling to in my day-to-day life, in my communication also, in my expression also. So I think even when teacher also tell us that go sit alone and study, don't do group study, don't talk to friends when you are studying, focus on one thing and then you can only achieve something. So what your thoughts on this?
Can I go? I don't know how many of you have noticed, but the hours of school that children are made to study are almost equal to the number of hours adults have to work for a living wage. So modern societies, so we are trained to work for somebody, right? This is what Foucault said, right? Schools are essentially sites of training for extractive markets. So, and art cannot survive in that space. And creativity, art can be something also, maths can be an art form as well. There are creative forms of dealing with mathematical solutions. Numbers are very creative the moment you take away them from a piece of paper, right? There are tendencies in people wherein they can use visual objects and replace numbers with them and come to a problem. However, for all of this to be done, you need leisure time, you need space and time, which is not monetized, right? We are monetizing everything. Every aspect of our life is converted into how much we earn, what profit we derive, and then it all just becomes very crass, right? It becomes very boring, very cliched. We need leisure time both as children and as adults. We need to talk, we need to have conversation with people in power that fix a living wage, wherein you don't have to work after hours, you don't have to work for beyond 8 hours, so that you have time to do more important things in life. Sit with your kids, sit with your families, speak to them, have a conversation with them, play with them. And that's where all of these creatives get, they have the space to flourish, right? It cannot be individual, right? These are all co-creations. We might think that we are very unique. We are not. From a very young age, we are actually learning the way we draw, the way we think from each other, right? If you put somebody in an isolated chamber in a box, I don't think they'll be as creative as somebody who has engaged with more people. Coming to, I think I have certain points which I specifically want to make regarding this conversation, certain objectives, so to speak, so that this won't be too abstract in that sense. A is that while we are talking about creatives and arts, we need to be very careful about the cost of these technologies, right? Education is a technology, it's a tool. Arts is also a tool, it's a technology. And since NEP was mentioned, if you see that right now, the universities or the schools which are very creative are prohibitively very expensive. Suddenly, now art being monetized is that schools which are more flexible, which have more play spaces, are crazy expensive. We need to make sure that we do not associate a disproportionate expense or a cost to this form of learning. Otherwise, only the elite and the privileged will be able to do that. And that brings to my second point, is that overall education should be a public good. That's my core philosophy. It should not be monetized. It should not be, people should not profit off learning and knowledge, right? So not just as teachers, but parents and students need to push the government to increase the amount of money pushed into public education. Even now, we do not, the government does not spend enough on public education as its own commissions promise it to be. We should be around 4 to 6%. It's barely 2%, and it's decreasing day by day. And there's a reason for saying that, is that right now people go all crazy that, oh, why should government spend so much? Most of the money that the government collects is through indirect taxes, through buying. So whatever you buy in the market, a 10 rupee bottle of water, the government collects a tax. And the fact remains is that the same amount of money would be paid by somebody as rich as Ambani, and the same amount of money would be somebody who is toiling and doing everyday work, who is doing contract work. So the government is obliged to give public education to all, because most of the taxation comes from everyone, right? This whole assumption that middle class pays the tax for everyone, so they should be the only one given free education, is false. Majority of money goes to the government is indirect tax, and that everyone pays, irrespective of their location on the social and economic ladder. So education as a public good is important, and that would bring about open access. So to do a lot of these creatives, we need a lot of resources, especially right now with creativity bound to a lot of technology, right? We see tablets replacing boards, pens, and papers. We see computers coming into being, AI. We need to factor this in. If somebody like me and my students have labs wherein they can use DALI and all these kind of tools to create, why should this be denied to children from other parents who could not afford to put their children into private universities? So the government needs to invest more in public libraries where they have computers, wherein children of all ages can be creative using the latest technology. We cannot say that, okay, my child will do their creative on a laptop, बाकियों को we should let them stay on a chalk and a slate. That is unfair creativity, right? That is inegalitarian creativity. So we need to make sure that the pace at which people are creative is fair and equal to all. Everybody should have the right tools. And I've seen this in many places. Recently, I went for a conference somewhere and we see public libraries over there. You don't need to go in and have a library card to access that library. So people could just walk in. There's a computer over there. You could sit in over there and do your work and leave. And this whole suspicions that people will destroy commons is false. People are not, we are not crazy. We don't just like to destroy things up. If we give spaces to people, open spaces to people, they will use them creatively, productively, positively, right? We should not be suspicious of each other saying, oh no, if we keep this door open, somebody will come in and, it won't be a bull in a tea shop kind of situation. No. So I think that fourth, which is very important, our instructors need to be more diverse. Our classroom teachers are not diverse. They come from a very particular social and economic milieu. We need to have more community-based instructors. And we see this, I'm very happy to see this actually happening in a lot of universities, especially ours, wherein children are taken into the community, right? People from design do that, right? Especially with arts and crafts. But not just that. Don't take students into the community, bring the community into the classroom, right? That is as important. And we see this happening recently. You'll see another instance of where, and why I say diversity is important. You see IITs being one of the most premier institutions in the country have the highest rates wherein people from marginalized communities kill themselves, right? There is death by suicide. Recently, there's another case which happened in IIT Delhi. A lot of these reasons are pressures wherein students feel alienated. They don't find colleagues of their own community. They don't find instructors who are sensitive to their needs, right? And this forces them to take drastic actions. A diversity in classroom will ensure that there is a perfect instructor for a particular group of students who can be sensitive to their needs, right? Who will not unnecessarily punish them, push them for something the instructor is ignorant of, right? If, for example, I come from the north, from a Himalayan mountainous community, right? If I know that there are floods going on back at home and my students are stuck over there without electricity or internet, I come from that region, I know the news. So over the summer break, I will not constantly harass those students saying, give me your homework, because I am facing the same difficulties as they are. Probably somebody who's far away, who doesn't know this reality, they will have no idea, right? They'll be just ignorant, plain ignorant about it. And during that time, they might disproportionate penalize that student. So I think diversity in classrooms, not just in terms of students, but in terms of instructors, is very important. And that will also bring about the kind of syllabus that is more diverse, instead of catering to just one small group of community, particular class or caste or social need. Yeah. So I think these were the 3-4 points I specifically wanted to make.
So, as Afreen said, I also want to emphasize on one thing, that is usually in schools, basically we are given oh, okay, so there is NEET exam, there is IIT exam, NEET and JEE. So all these exams are focused upon a lot more than anything that's more creative. But again, I feel in school level, the one way that we can include arts is by focusing on the way of doing whatever you're doing. And also emphasizing, okay, if art is important, then why is it important? It improves criticality. So how would you do that? What would be the process of doing that? Because it's such an abstract topic and people just see it as a final output, more or less. How can you focus on the process?
I think, for example, if we can set the objective first, whatever concept you're trying to learn, let's say, I can take an example, okay, that you can, with one activity, you can learn 10 different things and therefore integrating all of them. Let's say your expression or the medium is a 10 by 10 feet wall and you're going to do a wall art. Now I can teach the concept of volume through it. How much volume of paint is going to be used on that wall. Okay, so the children can calculate that. They can also, for example, understand the capillary action of a paintbrush. while doing that, why different brushes have different kind of, what principle goes behind using a paintbrush, how does it work. Then you can also have, for example, chemistry, because you can have water based colors and you have oil based colors and then your acrylic colors. What is happening? What is the different bonds and how does it react? Why do acrylic paints, for example, are permanent on cloth versus why are watercolors washable? And so you can have different kind of subjects coming in. And similarly, if I use dance as a medium, then I can talk about biology, I can talk about bones and muscles and what is happening, all the joints, and so you can very beautifully integrate a lot of things together. And therefore the differences between subject that we have created such sections. And once you are in one section, you cannot see, like, it's designed in such a way that you cannot see what the other subject looks like. So when you're in a biology, you're only supposed to think about biology. But world and nature does not work like that. All processes are intertwined and they're working at the same time, simultaneously and collaboratively, right? So I would say that there is a very new way of approaching design and education. And therefore, so once you set the objective, then it's up to the teacher and the children, how do they want to approach and what all do they want to cover through that particular, or how to achieve that particular objective. That can be done. I just wanted to say an alternative way of looking at, and this is not just one, I'm just saying a one of another way of doing it.
I think that was also mentioned by Afreen before when he said like it's important to have like a diverse, like a educator who has a diverse background so that he can cover these topics. But it's also very difficult to get such profiles, and a lot of people even like for them to impart education, to take active, like to initiate and come and impart education is kind of lacking, and people end up choosing things that are more defined in the future, because that anyways, like because of resources and of course income, there is also like a lack of good professors in classrooms. That's what I believe. If you all have anything to add to that as well. Okay, so before we jump ahead, I would like to introduce Neha. Neha is a dance therapist and also an expert in counseling psychology. Neha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Neha. I've been in the educational institutions and I've been working and practicing as a psychologist since 11 years now. I did my postgrads from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and that gave me a horizon to look at a lot of things from a very different lens, coming from Jaipur. Yeah, my entire idea and focus is on getting an inclusive space and inclusion, not only with respect to children, but also a lot of diverse communities. Being a dance movement therapy practitioner, I think this topic is really close because I have seen shifts, and this is where I am today. Glad to be part of the entire panel. Thank you very much.
Afreen, I think you have some other engagement after this. Would you be continuing?
I'll be here for 15 more minutes and then I'm sorry, I'll have to leave because I have other commitments. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, this is so interesting. I don't want to leave. I hope I get the recording and I'll see the rest of it. Yeah.
Oh, so now that we were talking about like faculties and what Gaurav suggested, an interesting way to integrate art in school. Neha, as you also heard what Gaurav had to say, do you have anything to add to this? And do you have anything like how would that affect a person's overall development?
Sure. Thank you. So I do agree with when he's talking about examples like how integration of different arts and education, when we look at education with respect to, what we are talking. So he gave an example that this is the wall and kind of art that you're going to be working on. It does give a developmental perspective to it. How? When I look at the physical development, say a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old is given such wall, the eye-hand coordination, the dexterity, everything is kind of looked at. The development is happening while they are looking at it. Creativity is not just restricted to art with only drawing and painting. It's a lot more, right? So when we are looking at that part, I feel we are giving children lot more scope to imagine and create. And the imagination really helps in development when it comes to emotions, when it comes to feelings. So that's where I wanted to add, like that particular part gives like a holistic development to a child, understanding education, understanding self, giving the freedom to be who they are, and also letting them be in that space, because creating that safe space is way more important than just providing anything to them.
Can you share any specific example or stories where art has transformative impact on a child emotional well-being or behavior?
Sure. So if I talk about dance movement specifically, I did see, because we were working with children who have been diagnosed with cancer, and every day it's a new struggle, right? And where the world kind of defines that, oh, you are now incapable of doing a lot more, we are certainly creating more aspects for them, right? So as basic as we were working with children to understand how they are feeling about it, because children do not have that sense immediately, that they do not have colloquial language to express the emotions, right? They do not know words. They would say bura lag raha hai, acha lag raha hai. They won't be able to define like exact words to it. So we asked them to pick up colors and the chart paper and everything. Now how they even hold the chart paper, vertical or horizontal, also means a lot exactly where they are, what they really mean. So say, for example, if they're holding it vertically and they start from, below, often we say that using, different, there are tests like draw a person test or house street person, although it's obsolete and we are still working on it. But as basic as when they're starting from below, it shows a little low self-esteem. In the middle, high, where they exactly hold pencil, where they're starting with. All these things kind of matter, and how they are working, what they are drawing. When we say in HTP or DAP that if they are drawing water a lot, it means a lot of nurturance is something that they're looking at. Or when it's trees or fruits, it depicts something else. So using that, we at least know that where they are coming from, because they're so much in pain that talk therapy, verbalization, it may not work with them, right? At that point in time, it's very difficult for them to come up. Expressing through art is something that we have seen as a shift, because unlike talk therapy, which may take 2 to 3 sessions or 4 sessions, and has no definite timeline as to when and how it will react or it'll bring in a change, we see expressive artwork gives you a lot more story. Now, once they are done drawing it, or once they're done working on it, we can ask them that, how do you think, where exactly in your body are you feeling these emotions? So through that, they probably sometimes move, because so often I learned it in dance movement work that no movement is also a movement. Let people be, because it's not dance. It's movement that they are working on, and body keeps the score in every possible manner. So when you allow people to be, they will react. So they will tap or they will pat and they'll say, yahan dard ho raha hai, yahan dard ho raha hai. And irony being that they won't point out pain exactly where they've been operated or anything. So that shift in particular, by expressing the story, because art also comes with the storytelling. And apart from just drawing movement, when I'm saying patting, tapping, everything, they also show behavior through stories. That shift can be measured there, and that's where they start expressing. So it's a whole series or a whole continuum, when one by one we kind of unfold everything. So in such cases, of course, keeping confidentiality, I can give exact scenarios, but this is what happens. They bring in change.
So that, oh yes,
Afreen has something.
Yeah. I have to leave soon. So there are certain final comments I want to make and also respond to what Neha shared. I mean, it's a brilliant, I think what she shared is a brilliant example of basically how art can be used to include people with differing access and which basically breaks ableism. There's a lot of ableism in classroom, uh, and also how neurodivergent folk can be included. However, I would want to sort of play also a bit of a devil's advocate, because these are conversations which are real about art versus theory, so to speak. We see these binaries created in the classroom, and Akshita and Shruti would be our witness to those. Like, I have been asked those questions as well personally. So there is a very easy binary which suddenly parents and students might do, which is reductive, which is false, wherein suddenly if you do art, that would mean that you don't have to read anything. That will teach you everything, right? I think we should not fall for that binary at all, right? We have things like project based learning thrown to us, and suddenly people think that, okay, you build something and you learn everything about it. These are binaries, these are very problematic binaries, because if you go back, and I mean, as a political economist, you'll see this is actually a very post industrialization thing happening, wherein suddenly we are moving from a cottage industry to basically mass production factory line. A tailor in a cottage industry would know the whole process of creating that piece of fabric, where it came from, what threads to use. As Gaurav said, they would know the whole chemistry, biology, physics of everything, right? However, current situations where I see project-based learning going through, it is more like a piecemeal, a small aspect. People are only taught how to cut the cloth. They won't even know how to sew the cloth. They won't even know how to market the cloth, right? That is problematic. That is not holistic learning. So when I say that we go for creative, we cannot take away the what we consider theory, what we consider knowledge. Why I say that is because art is both, it's a double-edged weapon, right? For example, a piece of painting, right? There can be multiple uh, perspectives of looking at it, especially with abstraction coming into play, right? And this is what I tell my students is that in order to understand even a piece of art, you need to understand the normative. You need to understand, you need to have a basic definition. If I'm using the word earth, right, and we don't have the same understanding of what that word means, we'll go nowhere. We might say, okay, let's be creative with the meaning, but how do we then converse and engage in everyday exercises, right? Similarly, for a lot of long-term projects, while we are teaching our students to look at different solutions and problems, we need to have a common language, a common value which you understand. And values are substantive aspects which will only come by going through a bit of that basic dreary stuff of reading text. Because see, we have limited lifespans, right? Barely 60 to 80 years. People might think that we have 80 years lifespan, but with pollution and everything, I'll be very lucky to live till 70. And even within that, we barely have enough time to experience everything. Also, the fact that people have made mistakes in the past and they have learned from that and written books about that. Why do you want to make the same mistake when you can just read about it and just speed up the process, right? So my point is that while being creative, make sure do not chuck away your books and theory, because they hold a lot of learnings from the past, what is right and wrong. Second, you'll have common language to speak, and that is not to say that you continue using that language, but if you know the language of your oppressor, you will know how to break it. If you don't understand language at all, people will just make you run about in circles and employ a lot of vague designs and vague words to create a rosy picture while it is not. So you need to have the understanding of basic foundations. And I don't care, you might then go about and break those foundations, but you need to know what the foundation is before you go about breaking it. And that is a big challenge that I see in this generation, is that we talk about radical, we talk about counterculture, we don't know what is the basic. So just going out and like the word uh, protest is being reduced to such meaningless things because people don't understand what it meant. Yesterday only it was Bastille Day in France, right? Wherein like one of the earliest revolutions against hegemony happened. Very few people will know what happened actually in France, where our constitution came from, where our fundamental rights come, but they want to be radical. So that is my point, is that while we are engaging in these new tools, new creative tools, it is not a binary. These tools are tied into something very foundational. So a picture might be worth 1,000 words, but if you don't know what the words are, you don't understand the picture, right? So you need to know the language you're speaking, where it came from, what those word means. By the way, do you a lot of these days there's a lot of credibility put into the word vernacular. You should know the vernacular. Do you know what the origin of the word is? Vernacular comes from it's an English word. Its past is very colonial. Vernacular actually is a very derogatory term. It means basically as attributing to somebody who is lower than your station, who is uncouth and uncultured, right? So we use words thinking of them to be progressive when inherently the knowledge within them is very violent. So be very careful. A lot of things that you might think is emancipatory technically might have very problematic history in it. For example, equality. We might say we should be equal, but a lot of our instructors will know equality technically was defined by English thinkers in terms of equality only for men, right? Only for men. They won't be attributed to also not just men, white men. So the liberty, fraternity, equality, whatever these English thinkers thought would not be applicable to women, would not be applicable to slaves, would not be applicable to people of color, right? So be very careful about using these words. And unless you don't know the history or theory behind it, you cannot break from their bonds and be as creative and flexible and reach the potential all of you do have within you. So I mean that is this one thing I really wanted to put through in this session as some sort of a devil's advocate, is that do not lose sight of I think it's a Japanese proverb that uh, for seeing the forest, do not lose sight of the trees, right? So you need to go to the granular itself rather than the whole aesthete of a very green forest, right? So I'll stop at that, and unless somebody who has some response, I will also take your leave in like 5 minutes or so.
Not a response, but just a clarification, Afreen. If what you're saying is absolutely correct, that do not let go of the roots. Without the roots, you cannot let the tree survive. But being aware of the roots, being aware of the origin, you can still branch out to different horizons. That's all. That's all I wanted to clarify.
No, that's what I'm saying. So unless you don't know where the root is, you won't know how to grow. Unless you don't know the foundation of your university. I mean, you look at US, right? This is a very good example. US, Canada. We have Harvard, we have Columbia, we have Ivy League universities. These all, beacons of education are essentially lying. They are basically burial mounds of indigenous communities. They aren't even on lands which they are supposed to be. They might claim progressiveness, but they exclude a lot of communities, both historically and also in the present, right? So unless you don't know where you are standing on, you might be standing on somebody else's grave, right? Your notions of progressiveness might come at the cost of your foot being on the neck of some poor marginalized, some person from a marginalized community, right? So know the foundation and then break the foundation. You might bring about a new foundation, but unless you don't know where you're starting from, you might be committing the same blunders as people have been doing in the past, right? As again, Asta said rightly, know your roots and then grow beautifully as you can. Don't stick to those roots. Do you know there are certain species of plants which actually sort of walk? They grow in a way wherein they create a new root, right? When they grow up, they sort of lean towards a new angle. And when they touch that new space of ground, if it's more fertile, that's where they put in new roots. So even within plants, they are locomotive plants. So that is very interesting. So as long as you're aware of where you are standing on, just don't stand on anyone else, right? While you're aspiring for your betterment. So I think I'll wrap up with that. Thank you all. I'm sorry I have to leave a bit early. Akshata and Shruti, thank you for bringing me in. And of course, Gaurav, Sniduja, and Asta and Neha. I mean, very interesting perspectives and conversations. And I make notes always, which I tell my students that they don't bring their notebooks in classrooms, but see, I practice what I preach. I even make notes even here. So just kidding. So thank you all for this time and opportunity. And Asa, please share the recording once it's uploaded. I would want to go through the entirety of it. Have a good day, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you
And
so much,
Afreen.
Afreen.
to my colleagues,
Thank,
I'll see you soon.
thank you,
Bye.
Afreen, for joining us.
It was great having you, and thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you. Addressing to what Asa had said, claiming about like there are branches. So even when I think Gaurav and Asa, you would be, since you both are from animation film background, even while making a film or even while, like there is a big process that goes behind, like you have to research about everything in detail. And even Neha, you would know that, so as a dance coach, while you are, so even in movement, you would research like what movement affects what. So how do you deliberate to students, and what is the research process that goes behind it? Like what are the key things that you look into whenever you create something?
You want me to answer? Or Asta, Gaurav, anyone?
Neha,
No,
you can
go
start.
ahead.
Thank you, Asta. So, Akshata, what we actually do, so when we are talking about research in psychology, if I specifically talk about, of course, there are a lot of readings, interventions, and everything to look at considering the community that you're working with. And community, when I say the kind of group that, who's your target audience? Before that is a very important thing called need assessment, right? We cannot just jump into anything with the plan that we have done it with children of 12 to 14 years in urban, so rural maybe wahi work karega. It's not like that. So a basic need assessment is done, understanding which we definitely plan out the entire system there, right? So in dance movement work, if I specifically talk about, we have an opening ritual, then we have some sort of warm-up sessions, right? So opening ritual and closing ritual, which is the first and the last step. We use a lot of movement using beats, rhythms, etc. That entire group is comfortable with. It could be just like a minute-long activity. To warm up, where as basic as we can ask them that, how are you feeling today, or what was your schedule throughout the day? And then they come in and enact that using movement. Now, as basic as brushing teeth, right? So warm up is happening through that. I use a lot of balloon work in it. So suppose we ask them that, except your hands, you use any body part that you could use. So I'm telling you this because I'm working with Project Mumbai as a program lead here, and we have done a session with police personnel very, very recently, and we've been doing it since December. Even thinking that adults would not relate, they do relate with some props because their childhood have been around those props, right? Talk about clay, talk about balloons, talk about ribbons. These are birthday party, mandates. And using, every other body part except your hands leads you to, again, eye-hand stimulation. So leaving it aside and also learning and unlearning. I'm unlearning that only hands are used to kind of, play around or be around. So I'm leaving it to imagination. One, secondly, then after warm up, we go into the process. So now if I know that my group is coming from a space where there has been floods or anything, I would never say water. It could be traumatic, it could be triggering, right? So I also, so need assessment and research, all these things go in place because you're understanding your group core so well, right? Now in the process, I may as basic as ask them to imagine certain things. Now those things would not include water or anything related. Right? So asking them to say process how they were feeling in the morning, basically your emotions and moods or anything that you have had earlier. So that goes on for a little longer because process is long. Again, depend on the kind of group that we are working with. To a space where we come to relaxation. So as basic as visual, relaxation or guided visualization that we call in psychology or in therapeutic space, we do that, asking them to be in a space that they were. Because if we have played with balloons and everything, of course, they're in childhood memories. So now in guided visualization, asking them to imagine how they used to look when they were child, because root cause starts from there. And in movement work, it could be one session and it could be many sessions, we do not know. Right. So starting from there, we have those 2 hours, unlike talk therapy, which is usually 45 to 60 minutes long. Here we have 2 hours long time period. After relaxation comes feedback, because of course, if your body has stimulated in certain manner and your mind too, along with it, there will be aches, there will be discomfort, and there'll be a lot of emotions at the surface. Right? So from there, closing it down, I often say to my clients as a supervisor also and everything, and even my colleagues, that if you can't heal, do not harm and leave people exactly where they come in, as and how they were, not getting them below that. Of course, emotions would surface, but this entire process takes time and not everyone can do. So often I hear that counselor is a very loosely used term these days, right? I mean, admission counselor is also a counselor. Coach is also a counselor. I mean, they forget that the core of or quacks have come on Instagram and other social media platforms without realizing that how they are triggering, they do not even know. And that needs a lot of research and sensitization before we go in, and a lot of supervision. So this is entire process. I hope I answered that question. Like I went 2 marker and 10 marker, but it's really important to kind of explain the entire process of research and why is it important in that sense.
Thanks, Neha, for sharing your whole process. It's so this also kind of I believe that even when you're creating a curriculum for school, college, does not matter. A bunch of diverse people should come together, including subject matter experts and not come together and then create something, because the thing is everybody is specializing in something, uh, and the others are not, and it's a human limitation. We can't do everything. And it's also coming from your likings, your aptitude, your you're naturally good at it. So yeah, so this is what Neha talked about. I think it requires a immense amount of experience and sensitization and being naturally aware. And I think it also comes down to consciousness that we talk and awareness that we talk about. A lot of time our whole challenge is to bring awareness to people, um, including art that we are talking about and creative arts, right? So for me, for example, I'm curious. That's my fuel, you can say. So I just want to give that curiosity to the student in front of me, or the child of any age group, because once you get that fire, then it becomes self-sustainable, because it has to be self-driven, because there is only a limit to which you can push someone, right? You can try, but even as educators we fail often. Fail in the sense that we are unable to create that spark in the student, and they are, they're kind of indifferent to the topic, the subject, what they've come to study. Like they have paid money and they have come to study something, and still they're indifferent. They're into another world of their own, which is perfectly fine. But it's our we try our best to inculcate that. And when I deal with any kind of knowledge that I have to teach, I will try to reach the essence of it. Okay, what is it that is triggering? And I also try to relate it to the human being. What is it that is triggering in a human being and why it is important, not just because it is math, but what about it is, or when we come to design, for example, right? So for example, if we talk about filmmaking, Asta would be able to tell more, but for me, then it comes to the charm of storytelling. Everything else might come after that. The details of, let's say, camera and dialogues and actors and acting and everything else, and lighting. There's so many components which we will highlight with them, but ultimately I'll try to focus with them on the essence of narration and human conversation and storytelling, and what story does to human beings. And it's not about film anymore then, because story can happen through a joke, it can happen through a conversation, And so then that's when the mind starts to, not because everybody has been watching films, let's say. So they already have a very set, ki, this is how a film looks, this is how an actor is. But when you start giving them these different visualization and that, ki, forget about the film, let's talk about the story. And then they can go back to the film. So, it starts to, even within art can also become clinical. Now that's a danger. So you have to understand, and that's why a lot of artist students, when they come, they say, oh, look, my pencil artwork, and it's a beautifully done portrait of someone. But I'm not very convinced because I'm like, you're taking art too clinically. You're trying to make it perfect. Now perfection is not the strongest suit of art, actually. It's not. So the word clinical, I would also say only doctors should use it. Education should not be clinical. No other field should be clinical except for doctors, because it's life and death there. Everywhere else, it should be organic and should be taken from the person we're dealing with. From there, we have to customize everything else. Let it flow. And therefore, we can't even force our students to think a certain way or deliver a certain thing. We have to give them a brief and objective and everything, but then let them be whatever they do beyond that, and then come and discuss. So again, by the end of it, no matter what we have done, we always see, what process you followed, we learn, and mistakes is a essential part of the learning process. So yeah, I don't know if I digressed, but wanted to give you a little process, how my brain works and how I work with students a little. And just to add the last point, which is, I'm also looking for other educators, other diverse people to collaborate on developing curriculum. Because I've seen in JKLU, when I was there, I would ask my faculty, everybody should sit for developing curriculum for each individual. So if there are 5 faculties handling 5 different departments, all 5 people should sit together to develop curriculum for Gaurav, and then for Rasta, then for Neha, then like Shruti, and for Akshata. Everybody takes inputs, and so it's always more vibrant. Yeah, that's it.
So just wanted to add, I think, talking from the curriculum system also, I've seen that we often forget that, and very rightly put Gaurav in that sense, because I was recently having conversation within my team also that you cannot make a policy on disability or differently able without having them on board, right? You do not even understand anything about it, and you are not the right person. Or for that matter, we have been talking about homosexuality and everything, but not having people and making policies there or doesn't work. And the second thought on creativity and perfectionism is also coming from a state of fear. I think we are conditioned so much from our childhood itself that we need to focus on what people have to say. So I often give examples to parents in counseling sessions that the day you told your child what they're wearing is not going to be liked by someone else, and as basic as when we are 2 3, that if you'll wear this, uncle auntie will not say good about you, or they will say something bad. We have inculcated fear in them, that it's so important for me to be perfect because others will not like me, and the fear of rejection and abandonment is on another level, right? And that is where the state of mental health kind of starts digressing. I think that's where we have harmed what we were not to do. So I mean, I was just taking it from your point further, that how it's impacting mental health in so many areas from there. And growing up, of course, our mindset becomes fixed rather than growth. So growth mindset is something that we have been looking at, because unlearning is so difficult growing up, because your community and everyone, your biases have started taking over. Just wanted to add that.
That's a brilliant point. So, if you allow, Akshata, Shruti, before I tell you the process, I'd like to add on to what Neha said and link it to our previous conversation. There was a point when I said that arts and creative subjects should be given equal importance. How to do that? It's easy said. How to do that? So, indeed, fear is the biggest culprit, which is kind of inculcated in kids since beginning. So when we were talking about reward punishment, that's also where it kind of, uh, comes in place. So when you're having creative subjects, may not be restricted to only art, could be performance art, could be some form of, like the school I went to, we had if we had 10 curriculum subjects, math, science, etc., we had 20 co-curricular subjects which we had to give exams, which were given equal importance to. So for example, we studied cooking, we studied Ayurveda, we studied yoga, and we were giving exams for those things. So when you have activities like that, what should happen is that you gather the group, and the group should analyze each other's work. Mind you, analyze, not criticize. Develop critical analysis of each other's diverse perspective. And if that is inculcated from that, foundational growing up age, you don't take rejection, you don't let fear limit you from expressing what could be out of the box, what could be non-conventional, right? So that is to add on to what Neha was saying. And process, I religiously follow the design process that we have learned when it comes to filmmaking. And I'm kind of a rebellious that way. And why that has happened, if I go back to it, is when someone had said that, okay, filmmaking and communication design may not really require design process. No, I disagree. That is something which definitely involves design process. And before design process, so what is happening with designers as such, or artists? There are some form of art which are tangible. When they are produced, they are tangible, and they are generating immense amount of waste. When it comes to things like film, I believe it applies equally. There is, when it comes to Instagram, TikTok, there's so much of content being produced, right? So even before I start the design process, there are these three questions that I ask, which is what, why, and how. What is it that you're doing, right? Why are you doing it? Is it even necessary? Is it bringing any purpose? Is it serving any purpose? And then how you do it. So that's where your skill will be incorporated. And even before that, you would kind of check that who is it that you're doing this for, right? So that's where the research will come in, that who is your who is the subject, and B, who is the audience, right? And then you apply the design process, which invariably starts with empathy, because it cannot be something which is very uh, stealing the word from the previous conversation, clinical or mechanical. It has to be something which has a purpose, which needs a reason, right? Then you decide based on your other analysis, other research, whom are you doing it for, what are you doing it for, what is the purpose of it. You define what it is. You clarify what your idea is, and then you develop prototype, which in my field would be a film. But most important point here for me would be the testing. And hence it would be a iterative process, that I will test whether what I assumed, that this film is serving a purpose, is it actually serving a purpose? Is it actually communicating? Is it actually you know contributing the way I want it to contribute? So that's the process I would follow, whether it's filmmaking or teaching or healing, any of these things. It has to be interactive. It has to have a seed of empathy, and it cannot be formula based. And this is something which we have seen in class also. When I'm interacting with Shruti, would not be same as Akshata, and it shouldn't be, because each one of you would have a different horizon, a different inclination, different strengths. And as a teacher, as an educator, those things need to be, you should be sensitive to, kind of identify in the students to help develop them. So, yeah.
Thank you,
Uh,
Oscar.
as Neha already talked about differently abled children and also like cancer patients, there's one question in my mind, like in mainstream education, we have seen that mainstream education mostly tends to be exclusive for those children, and also in some way, it also demotivates them because it separates them from the mainstream children. they have like special schools for them. So how can the education system of our country can be more inclusive for them and also more fruitful for them? Yeah.
So Shruti, like generally NEP, or we talk about rights on the person with disability or children with special needs, the policies are very much in place, right? It's just about execution. Now, when I say inclusion here, firstly, the entire system of exclusion is a bigger umbrella term under which we are including inclusion, right? And I feel that the mainstream schools should be sensitized, should be aware to have everyone in first. As basic as if I talk about when we were learning art, when I say art, particularly if I recall my childhood, it was about the art class, jahan jaake hame drawing karna hai, right? We had no more, we had no idea. So dance was not considered art. Dance is a dance class, PT is PT, then there are other things. Yeah, culmination of art kabhi hua and during annual days or something, they would get in together. But art period is this. And then there used to be a moral science period, right? Value education period and everything. Understanding that inclusion needs to be there because firstly, we need to understand that there are kind of people inside the classroom. So for that, teachers, educators, even parents, all the stakeholders who are there need to have that idea that okay, what we are doing. Because I remember when we were kind of young, and if even if there is a child who has had some skin issues also, parents of other kids would come howling in the class and they'll be like, no, 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 they need to sit separately and everything. What are we really doing? We are creating that exclusion already, right? Without even realizing, or maybe deliberate. Art and everything else comes way later because now we are understanding. I often say, using a quote from a professional only again, who said that imagine as teachers, a child talking to a teacher saying that I can't learn the way you teach me. Can you teach me the way I can learn? Right? And that's where I think we will include when the teacher is of a growth mindset and trying to understand that this is what a child may learn, rather than scolding them that you did not score these much marks, or this is what you're not doing, or this is not a perfect art, this is how you should be. The shoulds and must should be thrown out of the window firstly, right? Because there's no should and must when it comes to art. Of course, there's a process, like Asta also mentioned, Gaurav also mentioned, there has to be some structure to it so that people can follow. But variety, the horizon, the creativity within should be where the student can work on, or any individual. So when we are talking about learning also, when we are talking about project work and everything, let children be. So how you're making it inclusive, you are just giving a project, and then you let children explore as to how they would really like this project to be, through humor, through songs, through picture, through movie, through art, through anything, right? Art being the umbrella term here. The creativity, imagination have to be there. And just because you have had a limited exposure doesn't mean that everyone else is wrong if they have done something different. Different is not wrong, different is unique, right? So not putting them in the box is something that we look at. So when we are talking about inclusion, coming back to your major question here, the rights are there, the policies are there, and it's very important that children should not be in special schools, rather they should be in the mainstream. Because a lot of children who have been put in special schools growing up, they said that I did feel more excluded, because I was not put in a mainstream. Why was I? It was teachers' incapability or mine? That question often remains there. And a lot of, so if you watch this series called Atypical on Netflix, right, talking about child with autism who's an adult, and talking a lot more about experiences. So how a support system supports you speaks a lot as to how much creativity, how much authenticity can you get in your work. And it's like creating safe space for letting me be. So yes, mainstream schools should have inclusion criteria, and I say 25% is what we look at, but barely 1 or 2, because it's not the child's fear. Child is not even aware that what will happen to me after 5 days, 10 days, but it's parents' fear inculcating and stemming in that, oh my God, my child would be bullied. They'll not be treated well. They'll not be treated with respect. And schools also, not just from this space, but talking about creative art, talking about everything, infrastructure is also something that they need to look at. You cannot have steps and staircases, knowing you say we are inclusive, but in your entire school or educational system, you do not have ramps. You do not have, playgrounds, because child with ADHD would need space to run around. Child with autism may need stimulation, so you need to have those material in your class. You need to have a therapist or a counseling psychologist or any mental health professional in your school system or educational system. Only then we'll be able to. It's not one person's job. I think again, it's a team that can work on. Just like for movie, I think since we have been talking about it, it needs an entire crew. It can't just happen with an actor. An actor would not be an actor if there are no people behind, right? So exactly how I talk about inclusion here, and I think that's where we need to focus our entire, thought process, that what we are doing, and reflecting and agreeing that, okay, what we were doing is not right, is also good, because sometimes we just defend ourselves saying that, oh my God, everything that I did was right. But so the moment you say, but everything before that is invalid.
I would want to ask a question to Sindhuja. So basically, yes.
Just
Uh,
like yeah, before you ask a question, just to add on to Neha's point. So I think even if school has the intention of going, hiring counselors, making it a safe space, I think there is a severe lack of quality personnel. Yeah, even in major metros, it's a very, very difficult thing to get. So investing in people who read, do this kind of job, opening out more accessible courses to them, having a, kind of clear-cut path of what it is. The field, I think, is very nascent in that sense. Yeah, there are very pockets of, I think, where you can find help for, or pockets who are knowledgeable about this. But in terms of where it should be and how widespread, this knowledge should be, is very lacking. Even if you, even if the school wishes to include people, I think there is leaving out the physical infrastructure, which is the easiest gap to fill. I think the human infrastructure of working with these people is very, very lacking. And I speak with it from the sense of, trying to look for those people. It's not an easy job. They need to get in with, the school, work around the children, work with the teachers. So there's a lot of elements to it. So yes, definitely what would help is a lot more investment into it. Yeah, so yeah, now you can kind of ask your question.
Carrying forward to what you said, so are there any training programs available for teachers before, to enhance these particular points that we have addressed when it comes to mental health, inclusive space? So is there any training program that's
So
available?
there are multiple training programs available. Maybe some of them the teacher can do it privately, but most of them are through the school. So it does depend quite a bit on the management and the route they want to take their school through. So there have been schools which have, a very secure environment. There are schools which have defined programs for them in terms of this. But the inclusivity part, in terms of just even still neurodivergent, or even pulling in people who are ADHD, it's very difficult task. But in terms of having safe spaces for students, that is that's been a more achievable goal for students, for the schools. So yeah, there are quite a bit, teacher training programs and school-wide programs available, which can be, implemented by the school if it wishes.
Can you share examples of a few, or would you like to stress upon what kind of whenever a teacher comes, like when you have a conversation with any faculties or teachers, so what kind of challenges would you face whenever you want to implement a structure or a curriculum?
Okay, so to answer your first question, There are multiple programs. One I am available, which caters, which I know of, and there are actually multiple. You can go look it up. The one I know is actually the Teacher Foundation in Bangalore has a very, inclusive program on, safety and security of children in terms of how to talk to them, how to, create spaces for them, how to bring forth their issues out in a classroom. So they have a pretty detailed and successful program. Yeah, that's one example I can think of, but I am sure there are multiple, and we can get, if we can find them out. The second question of teachers, it see, again, there is a very staggered quality of teachers that you can find in different places. So I do not work out of a metro. I work out of a B center, if you can call it. So I feel like the kind of openness, the kind of non-judgment, things that we are talking about here is very hard to implement, because it's very hard for the teacher to understand. Like sometimes it's even easy to understand as a theory for the teachers in terms of, I should be inclusive of whatever the I should be, kind of accepting of whatever the child is putting out in terms of art. Yeah, theoretically they do understand, we might even get to a position of making them understand that, but how do I implement that in class? What is a visible skill that my child takes away at the end of the year? So it's the visible skills in terms of the other curriculum subjects is much more easy to qualify. I need to be able to do maths. I need to be able, like addition, I need to be able to do subtraction. I can do it creatively, but the skill, the process and the outcome is very visible to a teacher, and she knows that. She knows what is the outcome. She knows how to get it there. And there is a way in which, if the teacher's so inclined, she could work with different, students differently and get them to that level. But what is art to them? How do I evaluate an English essay? It's not easy. It's a conversation that the teachers need to keep having amongst themselves to get. You won't get to any kind of conclusions, but you try and keep talking about it. You try and see what are the different perspectives that the kids of, over the years are writing about. You get to appreciate, the various ways in which they're answering your questions. So to circle back to your questions, yes, there's a lot of concern about finishing the portion, lots of concern about, how do I talk to the parent if the parent comes and asks me, why is my kid not good in English? The teacher is answerable to that. I mean, we can talk a lot about, the student finding her way, art being a process of it, but there is also there are definite milestones the teacher has to meet in terms of skill, in terms of knowledge, and that adds to the pressure. And that doesn't. It's one way out would be, like Gaurav said, just to bring down the amount of portion. But that could be one way. But I don't think that's the only way. But that is a talk that needs to happen on a much bigger level. So that will need consensus among people, what type of education are we going to give in our primary years? What type of education are we going to give in our secondary years? Which part of it is going to be skill-based? Which part of it is going to be more, developmentally? I mean, everything has to be developmentally oriented, but where are we going to give our focus on in which period? And those are bigger conversations which are slowly evolving around the field of education.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we are over time already. But before I would want to conclude this amazing panel discussion, I would like you all to, if you have any experiences from your, like your personal experience that you would want to share, and anything that you have done in past, can you all please share it with us so that we can also look into it, and then we can again go back and develop a better structure or curriculum in future. Gaurav?
Adding to this thing, like there's so much pressure on parents and teacher for the quality of education, but others like filmmakers or writers have also contributed in our education system by making films. Like we have seen, like most common films are like Three Idiots or Tare Zameen Pe. These are films that really contributed in our education system, creative education system also. So how can other field professionals can also contribute in our uh, education system, and if there is any case studies or any examples that you have noticed that you want to highlight?
I think it's a number game as well. More people start talking about it, it becomes a norm. It's as simple as that. That's why it's a generational change which is coming in. See, the thing is, our grandparents, every generation had a reason to be the way they were. Socio-economical, political, everything. What is going on now? It's so I also study generations in a way because I try to predict where it is heading and where the world is going to head, because that's the people is what makes the earth, or even an institution. It's otherwise it's just four walls. Even the most premier institution, just four walls. It's a people which creates the institution, right? So in that sense, I'm saying that why suddenly mental health is getting highlighted. It was always there, but why is it getting highlighted now? Why are people talking about so many things? Why people are talking about, okay, don't do 9 to 5 job, all those social media trends and everything, in everything together. So uh, a big gap is coming from the millennial generation onwards. I can see that they are the ones who are saying no to a lot of things which were non-negotiable before. For example, if you get employed by the employer, you can't argue with the employer. Earlier with the boss is a boss, but now it's not the case. It's almost like we are ready to go head on with our people if it does not fit into the way we think. So we're not afraid. So courage has definitely improved. And now the another kind of thing which is coming with Gen Z, also a lot of complaints are coming with in terms of employer again, that they are so difficult to work with. But maybe the kind of rules we have set for employment and industries, maybe it's not the most human thing. I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm just leaving it out in the open, that generally people cannot be wrong. You have to figure out a way to live together. And similarly, this generational change which is coming in, the awareness is coming with them, because now they were more privileged than previous generations. Like how many resources I must have received, information I received, exposure I received as a millennial generation. Gen Z were born with a phone, and therefore they have way more exposure. Pros and cons. I'm not saying something is better than the other. I'm just saying the situation is such. And therefore, when they grow up, a lot of privilege, they think they deserve a lot of privilege, which other people think, why so? Why do you think you deserve this? When I don't see a reciprocation from your side. So I'm just saying that the world is changing automatically, and the larger awareness, the moment people change, the conditions will change, the rules will change, the systems will also change. I think if you try to change a system, it's not going to work. But like Buckminster Fuller was saying, you create a better system. That's how you change a system. You don't try to break existing system. You just create a better system in front. I think another way is that people change. And when people change, everything changes. So I think it's an inevitable thing which is happening. We need doctors, lawyers, accountants, everybody to be also talking in the same language that is people centric. And if it is people centric, it will include mental health, it will include art, it will include everything, and which is also happening. So I'm very hopeful actually, where with all the entropy and all the war and all the crisis which is happening, I'm actually very hopeful because the newer generations are more sensitive, and mental health is one of the key indicators of that it's been talked about. People are demanding it, people are talking about it, they're holding people accountable. So yeah.
And you're very rightly put it. And thanks for that insightful, thought, because it's also about being aware, as you rightly mentioned. Once we know about our rights, once we know about so much that's happening around us, or the possibilities, of course we would. I mean, it's going back to the caveman time, and this is also part of evolution. The old needs to know that the news are not wrong, and the new needs to know that olds are not obsolete in that sense. That's also a combination. Only then we'd be able to grow and survive. And of course, I mean, Gen Zs are, and I had a skill development training yesterday only, and there also everyone was just talking and led me with the thought that, okay, what's wrong in changing? We all have changed in that sense. However, we do see a little casualness or anything, but again, they're coming from that time, especially if we look at children 5 years later who were born during COVID, we would see those sort of anxieties. We would see those kind of impact on them. And like Afrin was saying, that if I know that there's flood, I won't ask for homework. It's the same thing. If I know that these children were born during those severe times, I need to know the history before jumping my guns onto them.
The question was that, what you can, especially what Shruti said, that what you can do for developing your curriculum. I would go back to one point that if by chance you can influence it to be beyond being a hobby class or beyond being a extra curricular class, that would be great. Inculcating, adding on, the exercises or processes which would integrate inherent need for awareness, for thinking, for developing curiosity, for it will have an inherent way of expressing. So if it can go beyond this reward punishment system, if it could encourage more, expression being the core, and also somehow explain the difference between skill and expression. Skill is something which would develop organically eventually with the course of time, but not at the cost of expressing, or not at the cost of being innovative, not at the cost of being unique, or coming up, and not at the cost of wrong and right. So if these things can be kind of checked when you're developing a curriculum or when you're developing a module, that could be great.
Can I add a point? Sorry if I think we're getting late, but I think although it is now known, but not to the parents, that how important different thinking models are, or how dangerous it is to be learning the way we have been learning so far. Because as you know, the technology is improving, AI is coming in, so more technical and clinical jobs are taken away by the systems, right? So which means the value of human mind is coming down to more creative thinking, because people want different answers. The typical answers are being answered by the machine, but the thing is that I have a very unique problem. Now people need people who can think differently, and the difference that we're talking about comes from diverse way of doing things, and creative arts is a part of it. So if parents have to secure, or the students have to secure their leadership jobs, or let's say want to ace wherever they go, they need to have a holistic way of thinking and a different way of thinking, and one of the few ways of getting around it is to do other things that you have been doing apart from it. And like we said, the creative art offers you so many, like almost unlimited number of permutation combination between what you can do, how you can do, what you can express. It gives a different neurological connection in the brain, so your brain works differently. So if so, we have to also kind of educate parents See, the thing is, not everyone is like holistic. They don't care about holistic nature. They're like, I want my child to crack IIT. I want a better job. Ultimately, it's about financial security. So as a designer, we have to create our communication accordingly. If the parent is looking for financial security, I'll talk and tell how creative art is going to secure their financial security. If the parent is like, I don't care about financial, I just want him to be a better human being, I'll talk like that. So we can't have the same, we can't design the same communication for all the people. Every person we have to understand according to the audience. And उनको उस हिसाब से पटाना पड़ेगा. So because we are not wrong, what we are talking about is actually, we have conviction because we think what we are talking about is right. Now there should be no shame in terms of customizing it to the audience, because otherwise we'll be banging our head towards a wall if we just talk about the same kind of communication with everyone, because the audience cannot understand that communication.
Shruti, you wanted to go? Want to go?
So, does anybody else want to add in some or something? Okay. So to summarize the whole conversation, so we discussed a lot about creative education. We dig deeper into the understanding of creativity among us, extending beyond traditional art forms and encompassing diverse expression. We have discussed the colonial system behind our education system, which we are currently dealing with. Then we also emphasize on the environment and also the user's need according to the design. Akshara, can you also help me out? You're on mute.
Yes, so we highlighted the key points that Shruti highlighted, and we also spoke like in the end, Gaurav also spoke like how else would creativity can benefit in larger groups, and also making in the end the main focus is to create an inclusive space. So we are looking forward to include all this in our platform and try to make it and integrate all the points that has been highlighted throughout the sessions through like especially the marking system, the reward system, the notion of fear among students. So these things need to change, and there is a huge process that goes behind in bringing such change. We can't do it in a bigger, of course, it's not an easy step, but then there can be, every individual needs to make a change for having to make a larger change. So I think this behavior needs to be incorporated amongst various individuals. So on that note, I would like to end the session. And thank you so much, Astha, Gaurav, Sindhuja, and Neha for joining us. It was great having you, and we learned a lot, though we couldn't really sum up like properly on like such vast discussions that was made. But then, of course, it was a huge learning process, and we would write down the key pointers once the meeting is over. Thank you so much.
I think the fact that you're going speechless is that there have been a lot of thought-provoking pointers which you need to now sum up and incorporate. But just remember that it's a game of heart versus mind, and how you can integrate both of it without, lowering importance of either, because both are important, and how you can sort of induce that amongst little students, little kids whom you're planning things for. And like Barney Stinson would say, just start with challenge accepted and see how you can transform things. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting us. And I'm gonna switch off my camera and run. I'm sorry about that. There's a meeting happening. Thank you so much. And it was lovely meeting you guys. Gaurav,
Jai
Neha.
Mirasta. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Scribe
you.
Craft
It's
and
good meeting you all.
and Akshita, both of you. It was really nice having this. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you.
Bye, Gaurav. Bye,
Bye
Sanjay.
bye,
Bye.
Neha. Bye,
Bye.
Sanjay.
Bye.
Bye,
Good
Shruti.
day.
Bye,
Bye,
Gaurav.
bye, Akshata.
Bye, Neha.
Bye.
And thank you, Shruti and Akshita.
Thank you, Sindhuja.
Thank you.
Good day, everyone.
Good day.